So it's been a while. I started a new job last week, so I've kind of been adapting to that, and I now have an hour-long commute each way. So trying to fit in a time to do a video has been quite difficult. But I've got a couple of days off, so I'm gonna try and film some videos. I thought, because I'm quite new to BookTube and you don't really know me yet, I thought I'd do a video on my all-time favourite books, because then you can get a idea of the styles I like, my genres I typically read, what I'm interested in, and see if your interests line up with mine and if my recommendations would suit your reading tastes. So my first one, this isn't just my favourite book, this is my all-time favourite author. I've loved every single thing she's ever written, and that's Maria V. Snyder. My all-time favourite book is Poison Study by her. This is actually a trilogy, so there's Poison Study, Magic Study and Fire Study, and then she has linked trilogies that follow the same characters or characters in the same world. Like I said, I loved all of her books, but the books in this world are particularly my favourite. So this book in particular follows Yelena. She is on death row after murdering a man. And the way it works in this world is that there's a food taster for the commander who's in charge of this particular realm. And they test his foods for poisons, and every time the food taster dies, the replacement is whoever is next in line for death row. And in this case, it just happens to be Yelena. And so she is trained by Valak, who is the commander's second in command. He's his most trusted person. And it's just uncovering Yelena's backstory, uncovering Valak's backstory, and there may be a romance that blossoms out of it. I've actually ordered the Fairy Loot signed editions of this first trilogy, so Poison Study, Magic Study and Fire Study, and I've also ordered, Maria's got a new book coming out in April called The Study of Poisons, which is this story following Valak's point of view, which I'm really excited to read. So one of my next all-time favourites is another trilogy. You'll find out I'm very much a trilogy person, and that is the Switched trilogy by Amanda Hocking. You will notice I'm not holding Switched, I'm holding Torn, which is actually the second book in the series, because I'm not that keen on Switched. I prefer Torn and Ascend, which is the second and third book, but that fully lies in who I prefer the romantic interest to be. So my romantic interest is introduced properly in this book, so that's why I prefer it. So Switched, the first book, follows Wendy, and she has never fitted in with her family. When she was very young, her mother tried to kill her at her birthday party, tried to stab her, and it was because Wendy had never really fit in with the family dynamic. She had curly hair, she preferred to be barefoot, she didn't like sweet foods, and it just didn't fit with the rest of the family. Seems a bit extreme for her mum to try and kill her over different interests, but never mind. So one day, this guy called Finn comes and takes her away, and she realises that she's actually a troll, but not in the typical sense that you would think of trolls. They just look like everyone else. I think they're described that a few of them in this series, they can have a green tinge to their skin, but other than that, they look like everyone else. And it's just uncovering the background of her family and what goes on with her romance. My next favourite is yet another trilogy. This author is very well known, and I think you either prefer this load of works from her or her other load of works. So my personal favourite is the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy. I absolutely adore this trilogy. I will say I prefer the first book, and then it kind of tears off a bit with the second and third book in particular, but I absolutely adore this book. Some people prefer her other duology, Strange Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares. I still really like those, but I wouldn't class them as all-time favourites. They were just alright to me. I prefer this. I also quite liked that the main character has blue hair. So this follows a main character called Karou, and it's already established that she is in a fantasy world. She goes back and forth collecting things that they need from different places using portals, and this uncovers what her backstory is, and maybe everyone around her isn't quite what they seem and may know more than they are letting on and keeping secrets from her. This next one is another really well-known author. This isn't a trilogy this time, but once again, I think you either prefer one of her works or the other of her works. So I absolutely adore The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. Some people would prefer The Starless Sea. I really like The Starless Sea, but it isn't in my favourites. I've seen online this is a bit hit and miss for people, but it's always been one of my all-time favourite books ever since I first read it. But I do like a circus carnival type setting. So the little tagline on the blurb of this is, "The circus arrives without warning, no announcements precede it, it's simply there when yesterday it was not." So this follows two magicians, a male magician and a female magician, and from their birth they have been linked by magic that in the future they will battle with their magic, and at the end only one will be left living. But it becomes more complicated when these two magicians end up falling for each other, and it becomes a star-crossed lovers tale. Now, I am in no way a classics girly. I can't stand them usually. They bore me. I find the language used quite difficult a lot of the time. But having said that, I do love the Jane Austen film retellings, but I'm not that keen on the books. However, one of my all-time favourite books is in fact a classic, and that is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Can we just appreciate this edition for a moment? Look at the silver edges. Look how beautiful that is. Not going to really go into detail about what this is about. Follows a young lad called Pip. But I think what I mainly like about this book is there's a very gothic-y, creepy vibe with it, with Mrs. Havisham, who is an abandoned bride who just stays in her bridal gear, and everything in her house is dusty and still set up for that wedding. And I just adore that. I think it's real creepy. This next one is actually a favourite from my childhood. I don't know if it really counts as like a classic type book, but it is incredibly well known. And that is Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. My copy is absolutely falling apart because this was my mum's when she was in school, and then she handed it down to me and I read it to death. So I think everyone knows the story of Charlotte's Web, but it basically follows this pig Wilbur, and he makes friends with the spider Charlotte. And as you can see, she writes things in her webs to make the pig seem more interesting and stop him going off for slaughter. And it's just a really sweet book. Now on to one of my favourite romances, and that is Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas. I absolutely adore this. I'm very much enemies to lovers fan. So this book follows Misha and Ryan, who have always been pen pals since they were young, but they don't know where the other one lives, who they are. They just know each other's names. And one day they are put in the same school, and Ryan knows who Misha is. She accidentally stumbles across his band and she realises it's the same person, whereas Misha is unaware that Ryan is his pen pal. And then it's kind of coming over the Ryan is not the person that she perceives herself to be to Misha in her letters. She portrays herself as the person she wishes to be rather than the person she actually is, because in reality she's like a mean cheerleader. So it's just Misha kind of encouraging her to be the person she wants to be and not the person she is actually being. One of my next all-time favourites is actually a series, and I think it's very well loved all over BookTube from what I've seen, and that is the Every Heart a Doorway series by Seanan McGuire. I am actually holding up In an Absent Dream because that is my favourite book in the series so far. I haven't read the recent one that's come out, I think that's called Come Tumbling Down, but so far this has been my absolute favourite. So the Every Heart a Doorway starts off in a school where all these different kids have come from different worlds and they're trying to get back to the worlds that they have come from. So they've got different type of worlds. There's logical worlds and there's like dreamy worlds, and each book follows different characters' stories. So I can't tell you this story because it is a spoiler of what happens in the first book, but this is my favourite in the series. On to another favourite where I prefer this author's one load of works and I disliked the other load of works. I think this is the first one we've had where I've actually disliked the other work. So that is Stephanie Garber, and the one I absolutely adore is The Once Upon a Broken Heart. It's a duology at the minute, but I think it's going to be a trilogy. The third book comes out in September. Both of the books that are currently out, I flew through in one sitting. And when I reread this first book, I once again flew through it in one sitting. I absolutely adore it. It's very fairy tale based, which I absolutely adore. I have the Fairy Loot edition, which is just absolutely stunning. If you look at that. So the other work of Stephanie Garber's is the Caraval trilogy, which I personally disliked. I don't know if it's because it came after me adoring The Night Circus and I was comparing it to that, so it just fell flat for me. But other people seem to love it, so I think it depends on your tastes really. But if you did dislike Caraval and you thought Stephanie Garber wasn't for you, I would suggest maybe trying Once Upon a Broken Heart. This follows the story of Evangeline Fox, and one day she discovered that the love of her life is getting married to another person, and this other person just happens to be her sister. So Evangeline is absolutely heartbroken and she goes and wants to try and stop the wedding. So she goes to Jack of Hearts and asks him to do some magic to try and stop the wedding. But then she finds herself entangled in a deal with Jack of Hearts, and it just follows her fulfilling the deal and uncovering secrets, and it's just an absolutely wild ride. I'm going to get my very basic one out the way. I'm not going to go into what this is about. I think most people know by now, but Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas. I also do love Throne of Glass, but I've only read the series once, so I couldn't really justify putting it on my favourites of all time. But the Court of Thorns and Roses trilogy I absolutely adore. I still need to read A Court of Silver Flames, but I count that as a kind of separate book anyway from the initial trilogy. Yeah, I'm not going to go into what it's about because I think it's so well known at this stage. Kind of the same deal with this next book, The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. Once again, I adore this trilogy. I do have The Stolen Heir waiting for me to read, but I absolutely love Jude and Carden and their story, but I'm not going to go into what it's about. It's so well known at this stage. My next favourite, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about because I went into quite a lot of detail in my previous video, my horror recommendations. But I couldn't leave this out of this video because it is one of my favourite books of all time, and that is Battle Royale by Koshin Takami. I can't big this book up enough. I absolutely adore it. If you love The Hunger Games, I highly recommend this book. It's incredibly similar, except this is far more graphic and gruesome. So something about me is that I've always been obsessed with vampire tales. I used to be absolutely obsessed with Twilight. I love the Vampire Diaries. I used to love Vampire Academy. Anything that had vampires in, I was obsessed with. So one of my favourite book series of all time, which I've never actually really heard anyone talk about, so I thought I would throw it into this recommendations, is the Morganville Vampires. Please ignore this cover because it is horrific. I don't have the same cover for the rest of my books in the series. I don't know why I've got this random little one. It is cool though because it glows in the dark, but that's about it. I've never, like I said, never really heard anyone talk about these books, which shocks me because they're absolutely amazing. I'm not really going to go into what they're about, because I think a lot of this is finding out information as you go. But like I said, there's obviously vampires in it. My last book I'm going to include on this list is another trilogy. I haven't actually read the third book in this trilogy, but I still wanted to include it, just with the disclaimer that I haven't finished it yet. And that is The Prison Healer by Lynette Noni. This follows Kiva, who is a prison healer in the prison of Zalindov. It's a death prison. Yeah, it's a notorious death prison, and she's just trying to make it through, stay alive, heal these prisoners. Then one day, the rebel queen arrives at her facility on death's door, and she's got to try to save her while also trying to stay out of trouble. Please let me know if any of these books are also on your favourites list, or any recommendations you have for me based on what you could tell from my reading style based on this video. Bye bye!